What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to start a series of previews for each division, so we're going to go west to east. Once I'm done all of this, I'm going to do a much too early playoff preview, followed by probably some rankings before the season gets started. So for these videos, I'm literally going to be ranking the teams from 8th to 1st in each division based on where I think they'll place. At the end of each of these, we'll have an idea of who I think is going to make the playoffs, so I'll do, again, an early bracket, and then we'll go from there. So we're going to start, again, with the Atlantic, and my number 8 seed in the Atlantic is going to be the Buffalo Sabres. Now, Buffalo had a relatively busy offseason, one of the bigger trades of the offseason with the J.J. Peterka trade. I'm going to pull up just daily face-off for reference for lines and such here. So we can see their forward group here. It's not a horrible group, and in the last couple years, goal scoring has actually not been the issue for Buffalo, which is a little bit odd to say because looking at this lineup, it doesn't strike a ton of fear into me if I'm an opposing defensive team, right? Obviously, Tage Thompson is their frontmost weapon, and they have some okay depth, but nothing that really rivals that of the teams at the top of this division here. And then as we move down to their group of defensemen, this is not horrible either. I actually think it's probably better than the next two teams we're going to look at, but still not in the upper echelon of teams. And then where we really run into issues with Buffalo is with the goaltending, right? So we have they list UPL and Alex Lyon. It could very well be a split of UPL and Lyon and UPL and Devin Levi for a lot of the season, depending how Devin Levi's early starts go and how Alex Lyon's early starts go. But all in all, this team just doesn't seem to have a ton of momentum. They seem like they lack an identity, right? Like their back half is not the biggest or toughest group up front. They're not going to overpower you. They have a mix of speed guys, powerful skaters, guys that aren't afraid to get busy in the corner, but like it's not consistent across the board. Not that an entire team's going to be, but when you look at teams like Florida, they play a physical game. They're not afraid to kind of get down and dirty. Edmonton's going to beat you with their top guys, with their speed. Same with the likes of a Colorado, whereas Dallas maybe fits more along those lines of Florida. Buffalo doesn't have that kind of identity in my eyes, at least. So for me, I struggle seeing them making much improvement on last season and the seasons prior, which is probably tough for Buffalo fans to hear, but I just don't think that they have a lot going for them right now. I think they probably need to make some more moves and find a clear direction because right now, while I have them 8th in the Atlantic, I think the floor is probably the highest in the Atlantic division compared to the others. If you look at a team like, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Jose, like those teams are all going to be worse by probably a good bit than Buffalo. So it's not like they're going to be in the running for the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes. They're just probably going to miss the playoffs, by a pretty healthy bit. My number 7 seed in the Atlantic, I do have the Boston Bruins. This is an interesting team for me. I feel like there's a pretty wide range of where Boston could finish. They do still have some pretty good talent. I mean, you can see here it kind of isn't in the forward group, right? They still have David Boschnock. Morgan Geekie had a great season last year. We've seen what Elias Lindholm can do. He hasn't done that in 3-4 years now, so I don't know that that's the expectation. And they made a lot of moves in the offseason. Arvidsson, Jeannot, Parker Wotherspoon, like a lot of depth moves. And you can see that a little bit reflected here. They do have Fraser Minten projected to be in the lineup for the Bruins. I think that's probably going to be the case. And their center depth, while not strong up front, like they don't have the best 1-2 punch at center by any means. I actually don't hate their depth if they can kind of shelter Fraser Minten in that third line role and let him grow internally there. I don't think that's the worst thing for them long term, but obviously this year it's not going to be the best solution for them. It's probably one of the weaker groups of centers in the entire league. But moving down to the defense, it's actually pretty good. I mean, they still have this staple pair of Lindholm and McAvoy, assuming they can both stay healthy, right? These guys both have the exclamation points by their names for a reason. And then the bottom four is really not striking a lot of confidence if you're looking at this from a coach's perspective, right? Like Zadorov, you're getting a boatload of penalty minutes and a guy that's not afraid to play physically. Mason Lohrei, still young, still learning, is going to be a good defenseman in this league, but the two guys on the right, similar boat, not necessarily high expectations for the two of them. And then, of course, on the back end, all the way in the back end, you have Jeremy Swayman, who is going to be the starter. He does not have to worry about the contract negotiations heading into the season, so that'll be a good thing for Boston, probably a good thing for Swayman as well. And I actually think his numbers will be better. This is one of those teams where, while I think the floor is pretty low for them, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I would be surprised to see them make the playoffs, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them fighting for it at the end. It's just Boston's identity. It has been for the last, like, almost 20 years at this point, it feels like. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this team scrapping much, much longer along into the season than we might expect. But all that to be said, I still don't have them finishing that high. I have them in 7th in the Atlantic Division. And then we get to the messy middle. So most people are going to say there's 3, maybe 4 teams that could fall into any of these 4 spots. At 6 for me, I do have the Detroit Red Wings. I tried giving this a lot of thought and seeing, again, thinking of these in like the ranges of where teams could finish. Like, what is the absolute worst this team could do? What's the best I think this team could do? Within reason, right? Like, I'm not assuming that all of Larkin, Raymond, and John Gibson are hurt for the entire year, obviously. Could always happen, I guess, but most likely, like, within those players' expected games played range, what do I think they're capable of? And I just don't know that Detroit still has what it takes to make it in, especially with the way that some of the other teams, not only in the Atlantic Division, but in the Metro as well, are growing or are expected to kind of maintain their pace, right? So their forward group is actually pretty solid, I think. There's definitely a bit of a hole here at left wing one. I mean, you could always bump DeBrincat up here to add some added firepower in the last minutes of the game, but I think that's a little bit of a hole. But Marco Kasper had a great season last year. I expect him to continue to grow. The same to be said for Lucas Raymond. And then you have, obviously the Kane DeBrincat pairing that's been a solid pairing for probably 5 years now. Not all with Detroit, obviously, but the back half is better than it's been in the last couple of years from Detroit. Really, since the beginning of the Yzer plan, has not had good forward depth, and I think this is one of the better groups of forwards they've had in that time, just because of the internal growth of guys like Raymond and Kasper, right? I also think Soderblom is going to contribute, a bit more this season. Same probably with Michael Rasmussen. Where I run into issues with team is really on defense. I mean, Mo Seider is Mo Seider. We kind of know what he's going to be. Simone Edvinsson is going to continue to grow. He's still pretty young. He's probably going to continue to mature into the season. I don't necessarily think he's going to be the same point producing type of defenseman that a lot of other young top defensemen are turning out to be right now, but the rest of this group, it's just really not that great. I mean, Ben Sherrod on your first pair is really not that desirable. Albert Johansson, Eric Gustafsson, and JBD rounding out the 6. It's just not that great. And then you look back at the goaltending for them, and you have 2 guys that are like career good when they're good, but bad when they're bad goalies. Like both Cam Talbot and John Gibson have always been pretty inconsistent. If you take out the first couple years of John Gibson's career with Anaheim when he was really lights out, obviously they're banking on getting the John Gibson that Anaheim got last year. He played a little less than half the games in Anaheim, and he was very, very good for a team that was not very good. So their hope is that the forward group will provide a good goal support cushion. The defense will be good enough, and that John Gibson will seal up the holes that are otherwise left. I don't know that I'm confident that's going to happen. One thing I will say, I do think this power play is going to be very good. You look at this forward group, they have all guys that are pretty dynamic players in the fact that they can be good playmakers and good finishers, guys like Larkin and Kane. DeBrincat obviously is known more for his finishing. The same can be said for Lucas Raymond, but both these guys can still pass the puck pretty well, and Mo is going to be a pretty solid QB1 quarterback. So I actually like their power play a lot. I don't think they're going to have trouble scoring. It's just going to be a matter of whether or not they can keep the puck out of the net, and I think the teams above them are probably going to be able to do that just a little bit better. So Detroit out of the way, who do I have at 5? I went back and forth on this, and at the beginning I actually had this team at 4, but after thinking about it some more, looking through the lineups, looking through their special teams, I do think Montreal is probably going to finish below Ottawa. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I'd like to see them finish higher. I want both of these teams to make the playoffs, and I'd actually like to see Detroit make it as well, but I just don't think that all 3 of them are going to be able to do it given the other teams in the Atlantic. So looking at this forward group, obviously getting much better. They've done a lot of improvement from within. Guys like Suzuki, Slavkovsky, Caulfield. They now bring in Ivan Demidov, which is really the biggest offensive addition they make this offseason. They obviously have Zach Bolduc as well, who is a new addition from St. Louis. He's really not that much of an offensive threat as much as he is a strong 200-foot player, so I don't expect him, not that he's not going to contribute, but I don't expect him to contribute offensively the same way I'd expect a full season of Kirby Dach or Ivan Demidov to. Nonetheless, this is an improved top 6 and really just forward group as a whole from last year, with the caveat that this team stays healthy, right? Kirby Dach has not played a full season in a couple of years now. We don't know what a full season of Kirby Dach is going to look like. If he cannot stay healthy, we're back to the same situation where Alex Newhook is your second line center, which is not really great for anyone. I don't think they want to move Demidov to center if they can help it. He was pretty good in the limited time we saw him on the wing last year. And then just continued contributions from guys like Line, who had moments last year where he was good. Obviously, a power play merchant, like the complete definition of one, but he's still got a really, really good shot. Can he come in and contribute, an extra 5, 10 even strength goals? 10 obviously would be quite a bit, but if he can do that, this makes this team a lot better. Obviously, the biggest addition for the Montreal Canadiens was Noah Dobson. This group of defensemen is actually pretty solid, I think. Again, not the top of the division by any means, but being able to roll out this top four is much more comfortable, I think, for Montreal than had they not made an addition like this, right? I think you kind of know what you have with Caden Gooley. Lane Hudson's still going to be growing this season. It's only going to be his second season in the NHL. We saw what he can do offensively. He's not as much of a defensive black hole. Not that he was ever truly that, but he definitely improved on the back end over the course of the season. They're going to want to continue to see that growth from him, and we'll see how much more that happens over the course of the 82 games here. But adding a guy like Dobson who can complement both of these guys pretty well, I do think it does make sense to keep him with Caden Gooley for the most part. But at the end of the games, again, if you need to throw out a little more offensive pressure, being able to throw out Hudson and Dobson is not a bad pair by any means. It's probably one of the better 1-2 punches on D in the league. Just kind of like thinking off the top of my head, it's not top 3, but it's probably top 10, assuming Lane Hudson does not have some dramatic fall off, right? So a good improvement there for Montreal. And then like a lot of teams where the rubber's going to meet the road is in net, right? Sam Montembeault had a very, very good season last year. He needs to have another one if this team's going to be successful. That cannot have been some flash in the pan and suddenly he's back to what he was 2 seasons ago, where he, A, was not the main starter for this team, and B, was just not that consistent. Jakub Dobeš is an interesting piece to look at in that he had moments last year where he was really good and had some other moments where he wasn't. Also, Sam Montembeault coming off a groin injury is worth noting just because as a goaltender, that's a difficult injury to overcome. And we've seen that in a number of guys, really. But it's just very important that you have kind of comfortability as a goalie and not having to think about injury history. So that is kind of an exclamation point, to put on Sam Montembeault. But Dobeš, an interesting backup. They do also have Jacob Fowler in the AHL who finished the season very strong. That kind of pushed Caden Primo out of the Montreal system, seeing what he was capable of. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Fowler get NHL time this season. I don't know how much I would expect him to see, but I do think we probably should expect to see him at least a bit in a Canadiens jersey this season, which will be pretty exciting, but also pretty interesting to see how it changes this dynamic here. So nonetheless, very exciting season coming up for Montreal. I just don't quite think I can put them above Ottawa, assuming what we know about both of these teams and kind of the question marks that still remain with this Montreal team. So all that being said, I've alluded to it a lot. Ottawa is my number 4 team in the in the Atlantic Division. This forward group has gotten really, really good. I mean, we've seen, obviously, internal growth from their core, right? Stützle, Tkachuk, Dylan Cousins is now the replacement for Josh Norris, Drake Batherson, Shane Pinto. And then the external pieces here, I think, are pretty good. Fabian Zetterlund, I would not expect him to struggle this year like he did at the end of last year after the trade deadline. It was pretty shocking to see his lack of production. He's never been a crazy producing winger, but definitely better than what we saw at the end of the season last year from him. And then, I mean, being able to wheel out a third line of Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto, and Claude Giroux, very good. And I really like that fourth line as well of Cousins, Eller, and Amadio. On defense, it's still not the best. They still have some guys that I think are probably playing a little bit above their weight, looking at guys like Artem Zub, even Nick Jensen at this point in his career, pretty inconsistent. This pair as a whole kind of scares me. Both of these guys have again, I keep talking about ranges in this video, pretty high and pretty low range of expectation of potential. Not that either of them are young at this point in their careers, but just don't know what for sure you're going to get on any given night with either of these two. And then their last pair, Tyler Klev and Jordan Spence. I like the Jordan Spence edition a lot, actually. I think it gives them a little more comfortability, but again, this is not the worst nor best third pair in the league, so I think this is fine. And then again in net, you have Linus Ullmark, and you moved off of Anton Forsberg. Levi Merilainen is now the full-time backup. If Ullmark can stay healthy, they obviously have a top probably 15 goalie in the league when he's on his game, so no real concerns there, and I like Merilainen as the backup quite a bit. Similar to Detroit, this power play should be quite good. I didn't really mention Montreal's power play. I think theirs is going to be pretty strong as well, but these guys have been at it for a couple of seasons now. I would expect to see Jake Sanderson full-time as the power play quarterback now instead of kind of this mix of Shabbat and Sanderson, so we'll see what happens here in Ottawa, but I do think they have just a little bit more in hand than the Canadians do at this time. But it is going to be a really exciting race, really for like the back half of the Atlantic in general to see who finishes where. And we could even see some of these top teams kind of sneaking into the mix here. So that in mind, Ottawa at 4. And at number 3, the top 3 is still pretty tough here. But I went with Toronto for number 3. So obviously losing Mitch Marner is a massive departure, right? You can say what you want about the guy in the playoffs, but in the regular season, he has shadowed around 100 points for a handful of years now. You bring back in Matias Maccelli, Nick Waugh, Dakota Joshua. It's not the same forward group. You can't, Matias Maccelli, when he's on, can be a good player. Nick Waugh's a solid depth center. I think this actually shores up their center position a good bit. And Dakota Joshua is going to be perfect in this role. I do not ever want to have the Capitals play against this line because they're going to be banging, crashing the most obnoxious forechecking line that the Leafs have had probably in a long time. But from an offensive output standpoint, it's just not going to be the same, I don't think, without Mitch in the lineup. And that's, I think, the Leafs' expectation. I don't think they're going into the season expecting to be this crazy, high-flying, score your way out of problems team. There's still going to be that aspect of the team there. They still have Matthews, Nyes, Tavares, Nylander. It's not a team that can't score, but their ability to produce will be dampened a bit by the departure of Mitch Marner. All that being said, the forward group is still pretty solid. I do think the wing is still kind of a weak spot for them, specifically the right side. I think Matthew Nyes, another full season of him, he's going to continue to grow and really blossom into, I don't know that he's going to be the next like Tom Wilson, but the same kind of player who can produce a lot offensively, but also forechecks well, is physical, is not afraid to get in the faces of the other team's best players. So he's a big piece for them, and I don't think that Leafs fans necessarily underrate him, but I also don't know that he's appreciated to the extent that he probably should be. And then on defense, it's basically the same story that it was last season, the end of last season, specifically with Carlo and the full fold. So again, probably the best defensive core that the Leafs have had in a long time. I think I probably said that at the beginning of last season. They improved on that by adding Carlo. They've kind of shored up that 5-6 spot, right? Simone Benoit, I actually don't know that he was the expected number 5/6 defenseman on this team going into last season. I think there's not really much of a question there at this point. And then in net, they're rolling out the same 1-2 combo they did last year, which obviously proved to be pretty good for them. If both of these guys can stay healthy, this is probably a top 5 goaltending tandem in the league. Again, assuming both of these guys stay healthy, they both produced very good numbers last season. You do, again, run yourself into that issue come playoffs if you don't want to do this flip-flop back and forth between guys, which is not really shown to work. Once you get into the playoffs, it's a good recipe for regular season success, but I think we've seen time and time again, once you get into the playoffs, you want to have one guy that you can rely on to play pretty much all the games, assuming no one gets hurt, which obviously we're hoping doesn't happen here. So we'll see what happens when we get to that point. Obviously, we saw that a bit this season, and they did go back and forth a couple of times, but by and large, I think they want one of these two guys to really claim the net come playoff time to see what happens there. The other thing that we have to acknowledge, again, is that the power play is going to look different without Marner as well. I don't think this makes their power play dramatically worse, if I'm being 100% honest. I think too many times we saw Mitch probably look off opportunities to shoot over the course of his entire tenure in Toronto. I think having another guy that's a little bit more willing to just throw it on and see what happens is not necessarily a bad thing. I know I probably sound like that obnoxious guy in the nosebleeds just yelling shoot, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for the Leafs. But all in all, I just have a hard time looking at this team, comparing them to Tampa and Florida and saying they're going to finish above them. They're always a good regular season team. I just don't know that they're going to have quite as much bite as they did with Mitch Marner in the lineup. So that is where I have the Leafs at number 3. Number 2, I went back and forth here too. I do have Tampa at number 2. This is one of the best top 6 in the league. Um, you can say what you want about a guy like Gage Gonsalves. These 5 guys in particular will carry a top 6, especially this top line. This is probably the best line in hockey. I'm trying to think of any other guys. Obviously like the McDavid line, the Rantanen line, the McKinnon line, like those are all there, but I think as a full group of 3, it's very hard to do better than this unit in Tampa Bay. And obviously, Hagel and Sorelli have been there for a while now and have had long-standing success. I don't expect that to change. And they actually have pretty solid depth, obviously. We saw injuries at the end of last season that made their playoff run a little more difficult. Obviously, they didn't last very long, but they ran into the defending Cup champions who became Cup champions again. So on defense, it's a group that we've seen for a little bit now. It continues to age. It's not the same, big, while also quick, while also very good at moving the puck, while also being able to produce unit that it was 4 years ago. Victor Hedman is starting to regress. We've seen that a bit over the last couple of seasons. Ryan McDonough is like an ageless wonder. He somehow still manages to do the same role that he's done. He's never been a huge point producer. That's going to continue to be the case here, and the rest of these guys just kind of need to fill in and do their jobs, and this should still be a pretty, I guess, good enough defensive unit, in large part because they have a top 5 goalie in the league behind them in Andrei Vasilevsky, and it's usually not 5-4 or 3 when he's on his game. Again, if he can stay consistent, have a season like he did this season or 2 or 3 seasons ago, this team is going to be probably 1 or 2 in the Atlantic Division, depending on the health of the rest of the team and making sure that they can still get the production and defense when they need it so that Vasilevsky's not facing, 40 shots a night. But all in all, there's not a ton to talk about with this team, to be completely honest, aside from, the relatively recent change, if you want to call it that, and adding Gensel at the beginning of last season. Like, it's largely the same unit. Obviously, Bjorkstrand and Gord came in from Seattle. That gives them better depth than they had at the beginning of last year. I don't see any reason why we should expect this team to perform worse than they did last season, and obviously they still finished 3rd in the division. So Tampa Bay here at number 2 for me, and that of course leaves the defending 2-time Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. I thought about putting this team lower. Obviously, they're going to be missing Matthew Tkachuk for the first couple of months, but it's very hard to bump this team down looking at this lineup. I mean, you look at this team and you're like, wow, this is a ridiculously deep 12-man forward group, and it's without probably their best forward. Like, you're going to slap Matthew Tkachuk into this line. You're probably going to have to bump out one of Luke Cunnin or Jesper Boqvist to fit him back in, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, this team can throw 4 lines at you. The one thing that I will say is it's not the same kind of like high-flying pace that gets teams a lot of regular season success. They will probably go through stretches where they struggle to score a bit, or they're just not as in it physically as they will be in the playoffs, which is what's made them such a good playoff team. But I can't look at this lineup and say, oh, I expect them to finish lower than a Tampa or a Toronto or even an Ottawa, if you want to throw Ottawa into that mix. And it's kind of the same conversation when you look at their group of defensemen. I mean, one of the more impressive off seasons by a GM in a long time, not because he made crazy additions, but because he was able to keep all of Bennett, Marchand, and Aaron Ekblad. And then the moves that he had to make were, offshooting a Vitek Vanacek, and you bring back in a goalie who is probably going to do what he needs to do behind Sergei Bobrovsky, who has recently come back into this conversation of, top 5 goaltender in the league after a couple of on and off seasons, which has always been Bob's prerogative. But it's been extremely impressive to see what Florida has been able to keep in place here, and I really don't have any holes I can poke in this team and say they need to improve on this, or they should have tried to retain this guy, or they should have gone out and tried to get this guy. Like, they are still, I think, top to bottom, the deepest team in the league going into the season, and again, that is without their best forward in the lineup for the first 3 to 4 months, which is just ridiculous. So, that is it for the Atlantic Division. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Let me know, again, who I have ranked too high, too low, why your favorite team is or is not going to make the playoffs. Leave a like if you don't mind, and a subscription as well. It is free. and I will catch up with you guys when we go over the Metro Division.